Welcome to The Deepest Cut, a podcast about the movement from painful experiences to meaningful music. I'm your host, Matt Connor. In the spring of 2023, a 28-year-old male walked into the Covenant School in the Green Hills area of Nashville, Tennessee, armed with an assault rifle and two smaller guns, and opened fire as he walked through several levels of the school, killing 3 9-year-old children and 3 adults, a custodian, a substitute teacher, and the head of the school. In the wake of such senseless violence, singer-songwriter Brandon Heath felt overwhelmed with the rest of Nashville. His own children were set to attend Covenant, and his close friend was the chaplain. The private school was near the center of his own personal community there in Music City. In the face of such overwhelming despair, Heath eventually found his way to songwriting, he says, as a way to process and heal, much like he always has over the course of 9 studio albums. His latest, entitled The Ache, was the resulting release, and specifically a song named Scars was birthed out of the devastation of that day. As Brandon told me on this episode of The Deepest Cut, it was a songwriting session with some friends that turned into a raw and vulnerable time of processing the grief and the pain, the anger and the confusion that resulted from such a traumatic event. Yet his willingness to voice his doubts, to be, quote, raw with God, as he describes it, allowed for a song that's provided at least some measure of healing and perspective for those affected by such a tragic loss. On this episode of The Deepest Cut, I sat down with the 5-time Grammy nominee and 8-time Dove Award winner to discuss Brandon's perspective on artistic responsibility and how songwriting helps shine a light in such an all-consuming dark time. Stay tuned for our conversation with Brandon Heath. Hello and welcome to The Deepest Cut. My name is Matt Connor. I'm your host. Across from me today, Brandon Heath, celebrated singer-songwriter for, do we say how long? You've been at this much longer than, let me just ask you this to start. First of all, do you want to say hello? I should give you the chance to say hello.
Hey, hello, everybody. It has been a minute that I've been playing, but not as long as Andy Peterson.
That's true. But I'm sure you've seen a number of people that you've shared the stage with, that you've toured with, that you've written like come and go in that time. And then you're still very much at it.
Still here. The Lord willing, I'm still here.
Brandon, I want to start actually with a quote around the new song that you put out with like the press of the new album in the bio and things like that. Because I want to start with a bigger picture. But this quote really gave me something, I think, a good hook to lean in here with. Here's what you said about the song Scars, which is going to be the song that we highlight on this episode. You said, "It's one of my favorite songwriting experiences I've ever had because I feel like in my grief, God showed up and gave me medicine to disseminate immediately to my friends. That song reminded me of our responsibility as artists to say the things we don't know how to say, put it to music, and then get it out to the masses as soon as possible to let it do its healing work." We talked about the longevity you've had in the industry, and that sounds like a very veteran thing to say, that you've learned the way your music works with its audience and in general have learned some things about the craft. Can you take me back to 2006 when the debut drops and your earliest days of being a songwriter, singer-songwriter, artist as a career? Have you always been aware of that artistic responsibility? Has that been something you've learned along the way? I just would love to hear about that journey from you.
I feel like I have always known about that responsibility that we have. I remember early in high school in an art class, and it says that artists, their role is to interpret the world as they see it. And I've never forgotten that, I feel like that's my job, is to interpret the world as I see it. And then whether it hits the masses or not is really out of my control. There's very few things that I can control, but I think I can be true to myself, and whatever the language of art or expression that I speak is what will ultimately go into the songs and hopefully meet people where they are.
Do you remember the first time that you were clued into the tangible reality of that? Was there a first song that you were like, "Oh my gosh, this is really creating connective tissue here, people responding in that way?"
Yeah. So I would say my first big single was "I'm Not Who I Was." And it was the second single I think that they had put out on me in 2006. First one was fairly, down the middle, safe, if you will. But even it did pretty well. So, right off the bat, I thought, okay, well, people are liking what I'm putting out. The label was excited about me. And, it's always kind of fun to be that new guy. But the second single that they put out on me, I was a little nervous about because it was very specific, very vulnerable. It did not have a chorus, so it didn't really fit the format of typical songwriting. I mean, everybody would tell you you have to have a chorus, And I would agree, But when I wrote that song, "I'm Not Who I wasn't thinking about any of those things. It really was a very pure intention of extending forgiveness to someone from my past who had hurt me. And so when they put it out, people really connected with it. I remember, to answer your question, I was in Houston, Texas. They had been playing it on KSBJ, which is a larger station in Houston, big listenership. And I was doing what was called a brown bag concert at it was a Chick-fil-A. So it was in the parking lot of Chick-fil-A.
Wait, are those white bag? Those are white bags, though, right?
Well, call it what you will, a white bag concert, but there were about almost 1,500 people who showed up.
You're kidding. At a Chick-fil-A.
Yes, at a Chick-fil-A, and I wasn't really prepared for that sort of response. But they had opened up the phone lines a few days prior to people to say, "Hey, tell me who you were and who you are now after having encountered Jesus." And people really wanted to tell their story. And so I think that's why what resonated with them from that song was the phrase, "I'm not who I was," but also the vulnerability. And so from the get-go in my career, it was more about vulnerability. And I mean, that's it. I mean, it was a catchy song. I just felt so much freedom from the beginning of my career to be able to go to a place like that.
And that's been the calling card for you the whole time. It's this blend of melody and, here's the earworm, the vehicle in, I guess you will, with the vulnerability there. The balance of that, has that always come, like, pretty easy for you? I mean, is that kinda what clued you in, like, "I guess this is what I'm good at. This is what" I mean, because that's really a labor for other people where maybe one comes naturally and it's like a real like a workmanship to get to the other side of that.
You know, self-sacrifice as far as my own story. I mean, I can remember since as a kid, I've liked doing that where some people would be scared to do something like that. I don't know. And listen, sometimes I feel like I've overshared about my story. I've had to learn how to do it a little bit more low key, because I feel like you can end up being very vulnerable if you share too much with too many. I feel like your story, I feel like there are a few that should know your whole story, but I don't think it's for everybody. I really don't. I think it ends up leaving you really ultra exposed. And I just feel like that's a sacred thing that's only for a few, not for everybody.
Can we go inside that in a couple ways? Because what I thought you were going to say was maybe bleeding out like that or being ultra exposed, whatever that is. I thought you were going to say that's not good for the audience, maybe in some way. But you pointed it at you first and said I think it's a sacred thing, almost like for your own sake.
Hmm.
It's only good to share that with a few. Like, what informs that for you? Have you felt burned by that, or like, is there a specific that you could point to and go,
No,
"Boy, I learned." Okay,
I've never felt burned. Like nobody's ever betrayed my confidentiality or whatever.
I guess what informs the sacred term there?
I first read it honestly in Oswald Chambers. I think he was talking, in My Utmost for his high. It's Oswald Chambers, right? Am I saying that right? Yeah. I think that he gave that in one of the excerpts one day. And I tend to listen to older, wiser people, but I have found that to be true. Like there was a time when I was performing and I confessed to some sin to the audience. It felt right at the time. And then when I left, I almost felt like I had betrayed myself. You know what I mean? I don't owe that to them. I don't. And I don't think they really needed me to spill my guts. For whatever reason I did. And I don't have any regrets, but I do remember feeling like, Brandon, you don't have to do that. You don't owe that. You don't owe that to the audience. God is the place that is where you can absolutely go as a confession, with your confession. But I do feel like there are a few, like I would have like 5 guys in my life that really know everything, maybe 6. I have a men's group that I meet with weekly where that's kind of the oath. It's the creed that we have, that we don't hide anything. And that's kind of bold to say because we all have secrets. I think there's a place for secrets, and sometimes it can feel a little icky saying secrets. But I feel like there are a few people, including your spouse, that there needs to be no secrets from. There's even some things that my therapist knows that not necessarily even my closest friends know. But I think as long as you're known by somebody, then it's good. But letting it all hang out there, you have these people that write these tell-all memoirs. And, I guess if you feel like you need to do that, then go for it. I don't feel like that's really me. Although I would like to write a memoir someday. I don't think it needs to be like salacious or,
Every detail.
yeah, like you said, like me bleeding out. I don't think that's good for anybody. I really don't. It almost feels like voyeuristic as the reader to hear things like that. Now, when it comes to songs, I think I do like being self-sacrificial, but I think there's an artistic way to do it.
Take me to the new album, maybe this song through that lens. What's a good example from this batch? And maybe even Scars itself,
Yeah. The very first song on the record, The Ache. It was actually the last song that I wrote for the record.
and ended up being the title track.
Yeah, but I already knew the title. I already knew that the record was called The Ache because I was trying to describe a feeling that I used to have for my father when I was a kid. When I missed him, there was a season that my dad was not present in my life, and I think it's because he was figuring out his own priorities and what he wanted to be about. I think he wanted to be a dad, but I think he just needed to remove himself, as we all do sometimes, whether it be a sabbatical or. But this was like a year and a half, which is too long to be out of a kid's life. So my mom passed away last year. So, this is deep pain for me.
Yeah.
But I'm also recalling when I was a kid, my dad just being gone and me seeing this sign from the backyard of my babysitter's house. We could see the sign of the place where my dad worked. And I would go to the edge of the fence when I was missing him. When I was thinking about him, I would just go and look at the sign because that's about all I had of him in that season.
But you knew he was there.
He was probably there at some point during that day. Now, again, I'm 4 years old. These are things that a 4-year-old is not really supposed to think about. But I vividly remember it. I remember missing him, and I remember the feeling. It's a physical feeling, the ache. So when it comes to the song, I knew that I wanted to write a song, but this was like my third iteration of the song, and I knew I knew what I wanted to say. I just didn't know how to say it. So I went back to the drawing board of I'm Not Who I Was and wrote it very autobiographically, very specific to my story and my experience, and that seemed to be the best way to do it. So yeah, I'm really allowing the person listening in, but I again have also seen how that sort of approach connects to people.
Is that true of your favorite artists as well? Like your own listening experience, is that littered with artists who do the same?
Man, that's a great question. I want to say no. I know that's an interesting.
I totally thought that was a softball question where you'd say, "Oh yeah, absolutely," but you just totally bunted on that one.
Any question you're going to ask me, I'm going to answer brutally honest.
Just give me the opposite of what I yeah.
I feel like it's my own approach. Now, if there's things that I'm borrowing from other artists, it's storytelling because I like that sort of format, especially like in country music. They do such a masterful job of that. The stuff that really inspires me is really like heady, like Simon and Garfunkel, the Indigo Girls, very poetic, not on the nose, where I tend to be more on the nose. And I think, that the on the nose quality, I think comes from country music because that's what I love. So yeah, I feel like most of the people that I'm inspired by are very poetic and a little bit more gray than black and white.
Take me inside. We talked about The Ache already as the banner over this new set of songs. But Scars in particular, can you take us inside the context? You wrote this with a couple other guys, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
What was the writing session for that like? What's the context there?
Oh man, I love that you're asking it, and you're inviting me to go in depth because I don't think I ever have. So you mentioned my co-writers, Micah Kuiper and Paul Duncan. So I want to mention them right up front. So March 27th of last year of 23, sorry, whenever you're seeing this, March 27th of 23, there was a shooting at a small Christian school that is in the neighborhood of where I live, the Covenant School. 200 kids, sixth grade and under. So very small, very off the radar sort of private Christian school. The preschool that my girls were going to at the time often go on to the Covenant School. So there's a connection that way in that regard, but also many of my friends and their children go there. So there's like already kind of a personal investment. And we had already committed to go to the Covenant School like a month prior to the shooting. So the shooting happens on a Monday, and it's easily one of the darkest days of my life. It harkens for me personally back to 9/11. You know, like I know where I was, I know what season of life I was in. For the rest of the country, yeah, they saw it on the news. For many private schools around the country, it highlighted this vulnerability because so many of us live in the illusion that, well, if we pay a certain amount of money and it's Christian, then we're safe. We don't have to worry about it. But the Covenant School changed that, and we ended up on this list. And I say we because my children now attend that school since last year. So just months after the event, we started going there, but already I was invested emotionally. The pastor of the school, or chaplain, if you will, his name is Matthew Sullivan. Matthew has been a pastor of mine in the past, and I immediately thought about him. I'm not recommending that you go back and look at the footage, but if you remember watching the footage of the police arriving on site, Matthew would have been the guy handing the keys to the police officers to go into the school. So already I'm seeing Matthew, I'm knowing what happened, and I just can't stop thinking about Matthew because he's the spiritual leader of the school. So now we're on Thursday. I had a writing session on Tuesday where I just couldn't write. I couldn't write anything. So I've got a writing session on Thursday. I know that I'm writing for the Yake. So I arrive, and on my way to the writing session, I get a text from Matthew just because I was checking in on him to see how he was doing. And he just said a few things that it was obvious that he's cemented to the school, and the experience is cemented to his life. He'll never be different. He'll never be the same. So I walk in with these awesome guys. My first time writing with Micah Kuiper, who's also the producer. And I was like, guys, I'm sorry, I can't write about anything but this. So we're 3 days after the event, very much feeling it. Everybody's confused. Everybody's sad. And I said in the writing session, some people walk with a limp for the rest of their lives. It feels like, some of these people lost children, like the magnitude of losing a child is pretty unmatched. But then for the whole community to be kind of traumatized by it, we're going to walk with a limp for the rest of our life. And Paul said, even Jesus had scars that never went away. And when he said that, I was like, that's the song. That's the song. So amidst real current pain and physical tears, the three of us wrote the song. And I felt the Lord's presence in the room like I have never felt. And so there is something very special about the song. By the end of the day, I had a demo. By the way, the master is much of what we put down that day. So some of the vocals, most of the track are what we wrote that day, which by the end of the day went to Matthew, Pastor Sullivan, which in turn ended up disseminating throughout the school, helping so many of those families, putting words and music to what they were feeling in that moment, and basically says, Lord, I know you're near. I don't feel you right now. I feel very sad. I know that I'm going to have this for the rest of my life, but I'm going to have faith that you're with me and that you also get it because even you had scars that never went away. So for me, I'm like, what a gift to have written that song and then to send it, inject it directly into the pain, and it for to be something that would help people in their moment of pain. That is the sole purpose of music, So I felt this immense amount of gratitude to be able to, we all want to do something when tragedy strikes, and we just don't have any words, and often we don't have actions. We're just stopped in our tracks. That's why so many of us give money, because it's like, well, at least somebody knows how to use this. Here's money. And it's not like you're paying off your grief so you feel better. It's just, well, I know this is a way to help.
By the way, how did you, was that, because typically you write a song that's got to be, here's labels, maybe focus groups, radio, or whatever, where it's like, what songs do we line up for singles and get it out there in some way? But you're talking about an immediate, you said, injection into the surrounding community did you just have full permission to do whatever there? Was that like a conscious effort of like, we're going to write this and put it out immediately? Was it like after the songwriting session, you're like, people have to hear this right now, and so screw it, I'm just going to send it out?
Yeah. And anybody who knows me knows how tight-lipped, but also like controlling I am about my new songs. I don't let the label hear new songs. I know it's hilarious. I'm very, very possessive over stuff like that until I know that it's ready, you know? Because often I don't want voices to speak into it until I know that it's done. It's my own quirk, but also my art is so important to me. And I'm also big on timing as far as like, I don't decorate for Christmas until the day after Thanksgiving. Like there's a time, almost stubbornly, there's a time for things, you know? And I'm working on that. But to me, this was different. It was everything about it was different. I just felt like this responsibility, but also this sense of purpose, and was so thankful for that song.
I want to get to the song itself, but I wanted to ask about one of the couplets here because I know before we do, because one, it's part of the longer toward the end of the song. There's this refrain that just repeats again and again, and it's this couplet that it just says, "If I'm not going to lose it, then promise me you'll use it." Like, do you remember writing that part? Well, I don't know. I don't even want to talk about it. I just want you to talk about it if you would.
Well, first of all, it came from like a structure, like a song structure thought. I was like, I feel like it needs one more statement. You know, it needs,
Like a bridge of
it's kind of a bridge, but it's also like, yeah, it is a bridge. Yeah, it definitely is a bridge. And listen, I'm one of those guys that is like, I don't like doing bridges.
Are you a bridge burner? Is that
I'm a bridge burner. Yeah. I'm not good at them. Typically, I also feel like they're very formulaic, and I'm such a 4 on the Enneagram. I don't like doing anything that's predictable. But from, serving the song well, I was like, it needs one more like statement. And I remember we were sitting there trying to think of what we could say. And I came up with the phrase, if I'm not going to lose it, promise me you'll use it. Obviously, I'm rhyming, but I also want to say it because I feel like God has given me the permission to be raw with him in that moment. Like also I think he gives me permission to question my faith sometimes. He's not afraid of my questions, and he's not afraid of my informality. And listen, I'm very reluctant to ever speak for God. But what I do know of him is that he accepts my worship, whatever form it comes in, even if it's in lamenting, because it's all through the Psalms. So, and it's very raw. And so I wanted to say something raw. Like, imagine saying, God, hey, promise me, you would say that to your dad, but you wouldn't say it to God. But in this moment, God is dad, So be informal, say, promise me, I will wear these scars, but you better use them, God.
I think the best thing to do here is just to let people hear the actual song we've been talking about. We'd love for you to introduce Scars and share whatever else you want about it.
Hey, I'm Brandon Heath. This is my song, Scars. I wrote it in a very raw, mournful state, knowing full well that God is near the brokenhearted and he's okay for us to arrive however we are. Here's Scars.
Feels like I'm walking away, survivor of a wreck on the interstate, stumbling from the rubble of an earthquake, still alive but I will never be the same. Feels like I keep waking up from running all night through a nightmare, lying wide awake but I'm stuck there. I can see the light but I'm still scared. They say give it time, you'll be fine. If I get one more piece of advice, I'll lose my mind. God, I hope this prayer gets through the ceiling. Not that I don't believe in healing, I know I'll be okay, but I'm not feeling it today. And I wanna think that there's a reason. That's why I'm praying to you, Jesus, because you know it's hard, and even you had scars that never went away. It's like a whole different world, I don't even recognize it anymore. Bleeding from a wound I didn't have before. Walking with a limp on a shaky floor. And they say, give it time, you'll be fine. It's easy to say when it's somebody else. It's easy to hope when it's not for yourself. Oh God, I hope this prayer gets through the ceiling. Not that I don't believe in healing. I know I'll be okay, but I'm not feeling it today. And I wanna think that there's a reason. That's why I'm praying to you, Jesus. Because you know it's hard, and even you had scars that never went away. If I'm not gonna lose it, if I'm not gonna lose it, promise me you'll use it. Promise me you'll use it. Oh my God, I hope this prayer gets through the ceiling. Not that I don't believe in healing. I know I'll be okay, but I'm not feeling it today. And I wanna think that there's a reason. That's why I'm praying to you, Jesus. Cause you know it's hard, even you had scars that never went away. If I'm not gonna lose it, if I'm not gonna lose it, promise me you'll use it. Promise me you'll use it. If I'm not gonna lose it, if I'm not gonna lose it, promise me you'll use it. Promise me you'll use it. Even you had scars that never went away.
You've been listening to The Deepest Cut, part of the Rabbit Room Podcast Network. Audio production and theme music by Isaac Vining. Logo and identity work by Meg Cook. The Deepest Cut was created and hosted by me, Matt Connor. Thank you so much for listening.